Is clearing the mist from Cloud TV. And I'd like to introduce you to Andrew Eborn, who is from Octopus Media, who is the speaker for the next session. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Right, well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and it's nice to see so many people here, not just in the room, but also millions watching online as well. First of all, I would like to thank Discop very much, to Patrick and also to Mark for all the fantastic work which they've done setting this all up. It's my third time at Discop. I went to South Africa a couple of years ago and had the joy of Istanbul last time as well. And in spite of all of that, my name is still juggled up, so it's E-B-O-R-N, but the Eborn sounds quite good. I might adapt it accordingly. What I was hoping to do for this session is actually make this as interactive as possible. So it'd be very helpful to know who's actually in the room, and where I know my friends in the front row. But how many people in terms of TV distributors do we have? Do you have TV distributors? Sort of about 20 or 30 people. And TV producers, do we have some TV producers? More TV producers, about 50 people TV producers. It's the joy of television at home. And those who don't like audience participation? Yes, thank you very much. We've got all those as well. So what we're going to try and do today is have a look at a number of things. People always talk about cloud television. And they talk about things like VOD and SSL and all those sort of exciting things. And what I thought is we'll start by doing a bit of jargon busting. Now, what does it actually all mean? Because a lot of people, they're a bit ashamed to sort of say that, well, we're not quite sure what the various sort of phrases mean. But it becomes more and more important when you're talking about fragmenting rights and so on and so forth. So when you're dealing, my background is as an intellectual property lawyer. And I represented lots of broadcasters, advertising agencies, big content owners, all of whom were looking obviously at the digital space. And what they realized is that existing platforms weren't quite catering for what they needed. And so we set up Octopus in 2006 with a ready-made client base and their wish list. And so what happened then is we represent, as I say, lots of sort of major sporting bodies, we're working with broadcasters and so on and so forth. But we're trying to effectively make things as simple as possible. We're flattening the learning curve. And one of the big myths about why people are not moving over to cloud technologies is because people, first of all, don't really understand what it means. There's a bit of a nervousness about it. So what's going to be helpful is just to have a look at that sort of tide. What I also be interested in doing is looking at the changing viewing habits. The way that people are consuming contents, as we've heard in the other brilliant speakers earlier, has changed radically. But that, in and of itself, presents huge opportunities for people at Discop and in other sort of functions. And again, it's working on the basis that we should look at what content we currently have, but also an interesting way of making sure that we can tailor that content for the new and exciting ways that we can do things. So how do we then engage the fragmented audience? The audiences now are no longer sitting down watching linear channels, but technology has made it possible for people to watch on different screens at different times and in different ways. So how do we reach those people? The other thing we'll be tackling about is actually tackling the fears about the cloud. Massive sort of issues, people, major movie in Sony was stopped distribution for a little while, as people may have seen. It's not a particularly good movie, some people have said. I couldn't possibly comment. But it certainly got a lot of publicity as a result of having to be pulled at that particular side. Also, what we're going to try and do then is have a look at the opportunities. What does it mean for people at Discop? How can they actually save money and open new sort of revenue streams as well? And finally, we're going to have a sort of interactive session whereby we can mass up this huge audience and have a look specifically at a technology platform and how we can basically utilize that to make that make sense. So first of all, jargon busting, and this is the interactive bit. Who can tell me what the cloud is? Any volunteers on what's the cloud? Nobody knows what the cloud is. So that's the interesting thing. OTT, anybody? OTT? Over the top, very good. Do we have a microphone somewhere? That would be rather interesting. We can talk to people, and then people find out who the audience is. Where are we on? That's about it. So, who was that? It's you at the back. Well done. So, over the top, absolute. IPTV, we'll have a look at that as well. What are cord cutters? We talk about cord nevers and cord shavers. We'll look at that sort of side as well. Digital delivery, you know about. Video on demand. What is subscription video on demand, and also pay per view. Now, all of those things are very important when you're fragmenting and defining rights. So first of all, the cloud. What is the cloud? Somebody somewhere, offer a volunteer because this is a technology term which has only just come into parlance over here. The reality is the cloud has been here for ages. And in simple terms, it is basically storing and accessing data and content over the internet. That's all it is. So people talk about the cloud for their content and they get nervous about it. But the reality is the same people are using their online banking and have been doing it in the same sort of way. So what Octopus does is effectively we're a content bank where you can control all of your content in a new and intuitive way. And what that means is you're opening new revenue streams as well as making sure that you can distribute your content while saving costs over traditional ways of doing things. It also means that you're saving money, so you don't need to buy the hardware. The difference between CapEx, your capital expenditure, where historically people used to store their content at home on the computer, and as opposed to having that sort of risk and having to renew hardware and so on and so forth, effectively what you're doing is storing all of that sort of content remotely. Now what that means is that effectively it moves to an operating expense, so it's a shared cloud infrastructure, and you benefit not just from cost savings, but also from the principle that you're turning around and saying, okay, this is what we've got, so you can keep the updates and so on and so forth. Somebody else has the cost and expense of making sure that makes sense. So different representations on the internet, it basically is exactly that. That's why it was called the cloud originally, because it meant all the different devices and they covered effectively in the cloud where you could be remotely connected on that sort of principle. And that's how the sort of cloud computing evolved. That's my favorite sort of representation of the cloud, where everything is sort of interconnected, whether you've got social media or so on and so forth, all of whom is providing huge amounts of data to make that make sense and create a really big profile. OTT, as somebody rightly said, is basically delivery over the top. It's delivery of an audio or visual video program and other media over the internet. Now, there's a big difference between OTV and IPTV. Well, not really that big difference. The most important thing is that OTT is where the ISP only transports the IP packets. So obvious examples of that are things like YouTube and Hulu, Netflix, which is getting more and more, not just in terms of carriage, but also in terms of producing programs. So what OTT has done is effectively create new players in the market in a new and exciting way. We also have the number of viewers that have changed significantly. According to digital TV research, from 2010, there were about 197 million households worldwide who are watching over-the-top television. In 2014, that number has risen significantly to about 374 million households. And they're predicting that by 2020, 706 million across 51 countries, which is about 50% of the whole of the households worldwide, will be watching over-the-top television. So a massive difference, a massive change in the balance about over-the-top television as opposed to people who are connected. IPTV, as I say, just to cut through the jargon again, the biggest difference about IPTV is it's TV through the internet versus traditional sort of TV, but it's a walled garden ecosystem. So what that means is you have a dedicated managed proprietary network. So it's accessed via a specific internet service. So for example, here at the moment we have Turk Telecom, but in the UK you have BT or Comcast, and they are effectively the walled garden. They're providing it in a particular way. Three different things for IPTV. You have live television with or without interaction, and the so-called second screen is people watching things like sporting events, but able to watch on a second screen to get a richer and deeper experience as a result of it, whether it's statistics, whether it's information, and so on and so forth. And more people are looking at ways that you can develop content for that second screen. I think that's a huge opportunity for a number of people here. Rather than the traditional ways, how do you interact with that sort of content? Obviously, time shifted, whether it's catch-up TV, when you're watching in the next day or whatever it is, or start-over TV, where if you've gone and can't get to television at a particular time, then what you do is you can start at a time convenient to you. And finally, video on demand, which you all know about, which is what it says on the tin, which is basically anytime you want to watch anything, at any time, any place, anywhere, that's your video on demand. Now, the interesting thing is there is a massive combination of different sort of content which is reproduced everywhere. And every new bit of content which is produced today is effectively competing with every old bit of content. So the challenges for producers and distributors is exactly that. Cord cutters, what is meant by cord cutters? Well, cord cutters are effectively, it's defined as a group of people who've dropped what are called multi-channel subscriptions. So they're no longer signing up to cable companies, or they're basically cutting effectively, their connection to a cable company because they're getting their content elsewhere. What they did a survey, SNL, Kagan did a survey, 21,000 US adult internet users. They say that group represents about 65% of US non-multi-channel households. So what's happened is obviously a big trend from people turning around and saying, we no longer want to take cable subscription. And it's risen from 2011 to about 5%, all the way up to 2014, where it's 7% of people have said, okay, we're no longer having the cable channels. Now, obviously, from the economic point of view, it makes a huge difference in terms of looking at the way that the television business is evolving. Cord nevers, just to cut through the jargon again, and a glorious expression, these are effectively people who have never had a cable subscription. And what that means, these are basically, it's the youngsters, the new generation, and they represent the other 35%. They're the little ones who are basically will never have a cable subscription. But what they're doing is engaging in new technology. When I sit at home, rather than what might have happened in my parents' generation, is I had 2 children, wonderful children. But what they do, we all basically go and sit and consume our content in different ways. So in the old days, there'd be just a couple of channels you can watch. Everybody would be a united family watching a particular program. Now, everybody's looking at their own individual viewing experience, which has a big impact what's going to happen socially later on. And I think what you now need to do is work out ways that you can build back the community to make that make sense. Cord shavers, the final thing on the jargon, they basically don't cut the cord entirely, but what they do is they reduce their subscription to cable companies. And basically what they then do is top it up with either the free-to-air services or the video on demand. And they're saving money and obviously adding content appropriately. So why are habits changing? Well, habits are changing for a number of reasons. There's massive amounts of choice at the moment, and people can access that content in new and exciting ways. I call it the curse of choice, if you like, because the difficulty is there's too much. I don't know how many people, when you're looking at the channels, if you go through what used to be the TV Times, you probably get a hernia trying to lift it up now. But what happens if you try and flick through the basic guides as to what's on at a particular time, it's more and more difficult to be able to engage and look at that sort of side. The other thing is cost. Obviously, subscriptions for cable and pay TV channels were far more than just the video on demand. So again, people are migrating over to new and exciting ways of doing that. Mobility, when people want content anytime, anywhere, what you're finding is a proliferation of screens everywhere. And so what happens is a connected journey throughout people's lives is looking at that sort of principle. Content obviously becomes more targeted.